we're in the belly of it now, and it just gets stranger and wilder to read about how far Favret-Saada goes into this dynamic with witchcraft. We're really going to start seeing how the bewitched think and how they think about the world. And because of the nature of this book, which I've read so many times, it's kind of confusing, though really rich. I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking through the details here. Hopefully, we'll really be making sense of what's going on among these characters and what it's being revealed by looking at them. As I've said before, this book is intriguing because it sort of reveals something and then conceals at the same time. It's a book that's like a treasure box that you just, as you read it, it unfolds in interesting different directions. I know when I read a lot of novels, especially pulpy novels, I love horror novels. I'm wearing Night of the Living Dead hoodie that I got last time I was in Pennsylvania when I went to Monroeville. I don't find that a lot of books unfold in such a way that really bear worth rereading. I just finished a wonderful Stephen King book that's recent, but I don't need to read that again. I'm not going to really discover anything particularly new in it. But this book, I read and I reread and I think about it. I think more about humanity and I think more about the situation. I think about witchcraft and the nature of magic. And it does so much for me. So let's get into it some more today. All right. So what about our cast of characters? In the last chapter, we met the people who are going to be with us for the rest of the book. We met Jeanne and Louis Babon. This is a younger brother, Jeanne, and the older brother, Louis. Now, Jeanne is bewitched, and his older brother, Louis, is an annunciator. He's known for being strong and knowing a whole bunch about spells. He was, in fact, the annunciator to the Régnières, the French folk that we talked about earlier before. Now, I must admit, I confused Jeanne Babon and Louis Babon in our last presentation. Jeanne Babon's the younger brother. Louis Babon is the older brother. Jeanne Babon is bewitched and befuddled. Louis Babon is powerful and strong in the world and is known for being kind of nervous and sketchy too, but he's also virile and in command of himself. All right, Favret-Saada actually encounters Jeanne Babon and Louis Babon at the local psychiatric hospital. Now, Jeanne Babon has been admitted there due to his alcoholism and nerves, and Louis is just hanging around, kind of trying to get them to do more treatment than Jeanne Babon actually probably needs or wants. At the time, Favret-Saada is working with the staff at the local psychiatric hospital to explore witchcraft as a belief, not as a delusion, because witchcraft and talk of witchcraft had been traditionally by the medical system there just dismissed as just being crazy talk and delusional. So who are these brothers? Well, Louis is one of the few people who would talk to the nurses at the hospital about witchcraft. Now, he would later say that they just sort of laughed at him and dismissed him, but Favret-Saada, of course, recognized right away that this guy is willing to talk about this stuff and to people who aren't caught. So he becomes a really interesting informant for her. Now, Jeanne Babon, who becomes one of the most famous case studies in being bewitched in the history of the study of witchcraft, has been admitted once again to the hospital due to his alcoholism because he got into a fist fight after getting really drunk with somebody, and they dropped the charges if he'd go into the place. So he goes in saying it's his nerves, it's really his alcoholism. He dries up, they treat him a bit, and he starts acting a little bit normal. But the family really wants him to be hospitalized because they want him to be treated for his impotency. And this impotency supposedly arises out of a bewitching experience. Right before he was married, he suffered a terrible accident and he recovered, but that's when the trouble started. It's believed that he had been previously bewitched by the neighbor, which caused this terrible accident when he was hit by a falling heavy wooden beam. And after that, he did not fully recover and that he was impotent, and he became very moody and kooky, even though he had been bewitched quite some time before. We'll get into the details on that. All right, so they believe he was bewitched by his neighbor, who eventually becomes the father of his own wife, who is his wife. His wife is Louis Babon's twin sister. Louis Babon's wife's twin sister. It's a complicated web here, which is why you see Favret-Saada puts up those anthropological charts with their heredity charts and genealogy charts. They have like triangles and circles and squares. They'll kind of map out these family relationships. All right, Jeanne is one of the first people to speak to Favret-Saada openly about being bewitched. Finally, someone will actually talk about the experience of being bewitched. Now, she takes him seriously, and he takes her seriously. So much so that he thinks, looking into her eyes and seeing her weight about herself, that she must have magic force. This begins one of the most productive relationships for Favret-Saada in her research. Everything comes out of this relationship with these two brothers. Everything out of knowing these chats is how she gets to meet her own unwitchers, or she meets unwitchers in general. She's enunciated as being bewitched herself. She begins actually working with an unwitcher, which we're going to read about. And I keep thinking about this. After meeting Jeanne and Louise Babon, she is pulled into the world of witchcraft. It's almost like Jeanne caught her. It's almost like she was bewitched by these strange brothers. And after, well, not so strange, normal brothers. And after her relationship with them, they who announce that she's bewitched, she ends up working with an unwitcher. Maybe they caught her all along. So these relationships are fraught. She may think of herself as an objective interviewer, but through this relationship, all the people she's interviewing and spending time with are pulling her into the witchcraft system. They think she can aid them in this ongoing battle that's been going on for years and years and years. Now, Favret-Saada starts wondering about this. She starts to think to herself, how could I be considered an unwitcher? And then she starts thinking about herself, where would she have ended up? I mean, if she knew what was going to happen and how all this was going to happen, would she have kept on doing it? Would she have kept doing it if she knew she was going to get bewitched? And then after she's bewitched, she spends years trying to figure out what happened through her writing. She wonders if she knew what was going to happen if she would continue. I mean, I guess she learned enough to write a book. She clearly did it. But then she asks herself, maybe I could have gone further. Maybe if times were different, or maybe if I was even more involved, maybe if I understood this system even better, I would have chose to settle in the Bocage as like a classic anthropologist that goes native in a sense, or just decides to just stay where they're at studying this culture. Maybe she would have enjoyed the culture so much and felt so at home that she would have lived out her career being an unwitcher herself in a rural area. I mean, could she? I mean, as it is, she writes this book to make sense of her experiences and her relationships. The book works out her difficulties. And I mean, this is true for all scholars. We really learn and explore. We learn about ourselves as we learn about the world. We learn through writing and through scholarship. There's an author named Franz Kafka who's very famous, who said an argument about how sometimes we need books. We need books that'll break us up. We need books that'll shatter us and get us out of our own thinking. But sometimes an author is the same. They need to write a book that will break them apart. And he says, this famous 20th century German author, Franz Kafka, says, we need books that affect us like a disaster, that grieve us deeply, like the death of someone we loved more than ourselves, like a suicide. A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. That is my belief. Sometimes a book breaks you apart and makes you see the world differently. So there's sometimes writing a book. All right, take a break. I'll see you in a minute.